For the Canada Day long weekend, the idea was hatched that would take us on an epic motorcycle trip through the Rockies of British Columbia and also to some of the best roads to ride a motorcycle on in Canada. The idea was dreamed up where most good ideas are dreamed up, in a bar over beer and wings. Earl suggested that we trailer our bikes to Calgary, unload them, and then ride through the mountains. Of course, all of us being bikers, we readily agreed to this great idea. So with little or no planning, it was decided that we'd load the bikes up on Thursday night into the trailer, and then drive through the night to get to Calgary. This would allow us to start our adventure riding through the mountains on Canada Day. It's important to note that on this trip we had two Daves. One we called Safety Dave and the other we called Crazy Dave. After Safety Dave somehow broke his handlebars while strapping his motorcycle into the trailer, we renamed him Rebar. Rebar would be the name that would stick with him for the rest of the trip. Our trip hadn't even begun and we already had a broken set of handlebars. No worries. With a little bit of racer's ingenuity and a trip to the auto parts store, we were able to MacGyver together a solution to fix Rebar's handlebars. By this time, it was close to 9:30 at night, giving us quite a bit later start than we had planned. The road to Calgary is a long and boring drive, and as we were all tired from the unplanned repair, we decided to stop in Drumheller for the night. This would allow us to arrive in Cochrane early in the morning, and then unload the bikes and start our adventure. One would think that after breaking a motorcycle handlebars on the first day of our trip, all of our troubles would be over. Not so. We were stopped dead in our tracks by the alarm system on Earl's Harley. For some reason, the key fob wouldn't disarm the alarm, which would not allow us to start the bike. After what seemed like forever, we figured out how to disarm it and got the bike started. As it was Canada Day, that meant that it was free access to all of Canada's national parks. This meant Banff was super busy. So busy, in fact, traffic was lined up to the turnoff of the highway to get into Banff. This prompted us to avoid Banff altogether and just head straight towards Radium. We arrived in Radium hungry and a little bit cold. After fueling, we went to find a good hot meal. It had been our plan to ride to Nelson, BC, where we had our hotel booked. However, while enjoying our meal, the waitress told us it would be like a 4 to 5 hour ride to get to Nelson. None of us were up for that this day. After hearing that, we revised our plan and started looking for a hotel that was closer. After a frenzy of hastily made phone calls, we secured lodging at a Best Western that we all thought was in Creston, BC, which was only about an hour away from Radium. We left Radium with an easy ride and arrived in Creston only to be told by the people at the Creston Tim Hortons that the Best Western we were looking for was actually in Castlegar, which is about an hour and a half ride away over the Selmo Pass. No worries, we thought. 90 minutes of riding? That's no problem. Being prairie boys, the words Selmo Pass really didn't mean much to us. Well, the Selmo Pass is the highest paved highway pass in the Rockies, and riding over it at 10 o'clock at night, July 1st, let me tell you, it was pretty cold. So cold, in fact, that there was still ice in the lakes at the top and pockets of snow. We arrived in Castlegar later that night. The next day we awoke to beautiful weather. As Rebar and I were up early, we decided to go wash our bikes. I had been trying to wash my bike all week previous to our trip and just never seemed to get the time. Out in front of the hotel there was a gigantic black rooster. Of course, this meant we had to get some pictures of Crazy Dave trying to ride the big black cock. Our destination for day 2 was Kelowna by way of Osoyoos. Here's a group shot that we got a British tourist to take of us overlooking Osoyoos. We arrived in Kelowna and almost melted from the heat and the slow pace of traffic to get there. Thankfully, the hotel had a pool for us to cool down in. That night, we went for a great meal and enjoyed the party atmosphere of Kelowna. We got our earliest start of the trip on the 3rd day as we headed to Nakusp. For some reason, throughout the trip, I couldn't pronounce Nakusp for the life of me. In fact, I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly now. The highlight of my ride was the highway from Cherryville to Needles Ferry Crossing. There was virtually no traffic, the weather was great, and the scenery was breathtaking. Not to mention the road was full of corners and twists that can only truly be appreciated when you are on a motorcycle. It was one of the most incredible rides I have ever done. Without even trying, we timed the ferry perfect. We rolled down the last hill right onto the ferry, and just as I got my helmet off, the ferry started for the other side. I still maintain that it was a fake ferry, as it was drawn across the water by a cable, but it was awesome nonetheless. It was a short ride from the ferry crossing to Nakusp. Now, Nakusp is a beautiful town nestled in the mountains, and I hope to get back there and camp around that area someday. We enjoyed a fantastic lunch at an Italian restaurant and then headed off to Revelstoke. Our planned destination was Golden for the night, and this involved another ferry crossing at Galena to Shelter Bay. This time it was a real ferry with no cable. Our timing wasn't quite as good this time, and we had to wait. While waiting, we talked to a few other bikers who were also waiting. The cool thing about bikes and ferries is, bikes generally get to load first. We got the bikes loaded and the ferry started across. Back on land, we sped off to Revelstoke and fueled. We then headed to Golden via the Rogers Pass. The plan was to stop at the top of the pass for another group picture. While we were waiting at the pass for the rest of our group, we got a call that one of the group had had an accident. After hearing that, we all rushed back to the scene of the accident to check out what was going on. Fortunately, Crazy Dave was not hurt. His bike, however, was a complete write-off. The ambulance took him to Revelstoke just to make sure that he was all right, and it was then that it was decided that Rebar and I would ride back to Cochrane, pick up the trucks and trailer, and come back that night. So off we rode a little bit shaken up. We drove back to Golden with the trucks and trailer that night, and it was a long day. The next day we loaded the bikes and headed for home. Despite Dave's crash, it was still a fantastic trip.